welcome again. I want to start by just introducing our ethos, our tenets, our motivation, the reasons that we've worked on this for so long. So as you see, there's a little bit of a family show with Turner, James, and me, and then our co-founder, Carolyn, who founded Legal Learning with us. Meantime, at ASU, wearing my ASU hat, we've been working really hard on bringing inquiry and student motivation into the classroom. So that's the whole interplanetary team here, and especially Catherine, who's our director of learning. And so this has been an effort of well over a decade, and in fact, just to give you the backstory, starting about 20 years ago, Turner and James and I, as a family, when Turner was maybe 10 or something, I don't know, do you remember, Turner, when we started talking about this? We started talking about what makes a virtuous career. That if you could spend your life doing anything, what would be the best way that you could spend your time? And so for us as a family, like becoming ridiculously wealthy was kind of off the table. Like that's the opposite of what we're talking about. And so we really thought about a lot of things, and sort of some facile answers that people would give would be like, we need to help healthcare, or it should be charitable. But in the end, after actually years of discussing this, we decided it was education, that education was literally the most important thing in the world. And so then we were like, wow, we got it, education, score, we now know what it is. When they're like, okay, but what? And this is where you all, I think, have been thinking and working and making great progress all along. And so we decided it had to be student-centered, motivational, and as close to kind of the natural processes of learning, only in the classroom, as possible, so that it's all a metacognitive process for the students where they are learning how to learn, and their learning agency while they learn in the classroom. So this is the motivation, the background for what we're doing here, just so you know where we're coming from. So, challenges. One of the big challenges is that classrooms are often entirely unlike work and life. And I don't think there's a lot of this in this crowd, and I just want to really recognize strongly and make sure you all hear me when I say, we all know that you all are experts in education. So I'm not meaning to proselytize or condescend or blame. I want you to really take this in. I think we're talking about a process at large, which mostly doesn't apply to us in this room. And we're really excited to hear from everybody your own experiences. So please don't think that I'm blaming anybody for doing a bad practice. That's not what I'm doing. But traditionally in classrooms, there's memorization and multiple choice tests. And I think probably all of us experience these things at one point or another. In real life, you basically never do those things. In real life, you basically never sit still and receive information unquestioningly and then later say the same things back to the same person. Right? That's just not a life process. So trying to figure out how we can make the classroom teach the same skills you actually need for life is one of our big goals. Another one is that in the classroom, the more we have to conform to standardized testing, standards, state-determined curricula, things like that, the more student choice is restricted. They have to do the things that you have to do. And when choice is restricted, motivation is restricted. So one of our things we want to do is really increase student motivation through choice. And then finally, content is everywhere today. In the old days, you'd go to school because school had the content and you wanted the content. Now content is all around you all the time. And so in this information age, we think students need more critical thinking. And I'm wondering, do these three problems, do they resonate for any of you? Hands? Or is there anybody who's like, no, I don't totally get this? So it sounds like there's some resonance anyway, kind of seeing things in the similar way. So here's some amazing data. So for every 100 people born, 90 of them get to attend primary school, 65 of them get to attend secondary school, but only 3% of them actually get those critical, durable skills that are needed to thrive. Things like working in teams and solving problems and having agency, having choice in school. I think you all know that the more a student's choice is restricted and the more the learning is passive, the more they become helpless. Learned helplessness is a real psychological phenomenon, which I think many of you know of. And the more a person gets used to sitting still and being told, the more likely it is that the rest of their life will be that way. So the 3% of people who actually get to learn the skills of taking action, choosing their own direction, learning how to learn, causes this. It causes communities, whole communities that are left without skilled local problem solvers. And that problem solving has become centralized, and dare I say, it's become the province of the elite. And so we have this vision that we as teachers can create a society of people who have a sense of agency and critical thinking and the ability to solve problems, where problem solving can become localized again. It can become commonplace. So it's not a small problem that we're hoping to approach, and I suspect that all of you in this room are seeing the same kind of problems that we are from one angle or another. So that sums up the world that we're trying to change and the way that we're trying to change it. And so these are the 3 open citizen goals that I've already talked to you about this morning, that students would feel connected, supported, and that they belong, that they would develop their question asking and research skills, and that they would take ownership over their research project. And so within the context of that, that kind of demographic social science intro that I just gave you, I think you can see especially why these 3 goals are really critical. So, something that I've become quite obsessed with is the hero model. The hero model where one person, like me right now, controls everything. And so this happens in academic research. The professor owns the topic at the university, and none dare tread upon my sacred research space. Like, I study how rocky planets become habitable, and like, don't you come and do research on that, because that's my world. And so that happens in research, and it happens in the classroom, right? A classic classroom model is the hero teacher stands at the front of the classroom, delivers information, and the students passively receive it. And so that's a hero model, which I think we need less of. And so it doesn't go away totally. You still need somebody who's kind of leading and in charge. But what about a facilitator model instead? And so we really like the team model, where the entire classroom, including the teacher, are faced toward a big external question that motivates the whole classroom as a team to try to solve it together. So the goal question, and goal question is a phrase we use in Open Citizen because we're going to set a goal question. The goal question is exterior to all of us on the team rather than inside a leader. And so teachers in this model become facilitators. And I know you've all thought of this as teachers, that when you ask a student a question in the classroom, depending on how you manage it, a lot of times it's really a test. You know the answer, and you're trying to get them to tell you the answer. Now, in real life, that does not happen in the workplace unless you have a really bizarre and kind of terrible workplace, so then it does happen sometimes. But it's always a test then, because in real life, what happens is, if anyone on the team knows the answer for something the whole team needs to know, they share it. And so having a question that even you as the teacher don't know all the answers to is key, because that way everyone shares the piece of knowledge that they gain when they gain it, and you become a team. So that's where we're going with this team model, with the big exterior question. Now here's a bit of data I just want to show you. And I know the graph is a little bit hard to read, and I'm going to walk you through it, but before I do, I just want to ask, how many of you are familiar, and Sarah, this is the new bit that I added, so don't freak out. we planned this whole thing, Sarah and I. So how many of you know about the ICAP framework that was done by Chi and Wiley? This paper's from 2014. So you do be, you guys, so this graph actually, since I learned about it, has kind of changed my life. So let me explain what we're looking at. What Chi and Wiley did was they took, oh my gosh, I meant to look this up and I forgot, several thousand studies, 10,000 studies, 8,000 studies? It was like 2,000 studies, something like that. We'd have to look it up. We don't know the right answer. Studies of classrooms across many, many different topics and through high school and college. Did they go below high school? I'm looking at Turner because maybe he remembers. I think, do you remember, Beeb, did they go below high school?
I did a whole study in the junior high sector.
Tell us. So they did junior high and high school and college, any topic. The requirement was that there would be a description of how the pedagogy worked in the classroom, and the students had to take a pre-test and a post-test. So pre-test and post-test, any age, any content. And so what they did was, and before you really are trying to parse the slide, let me point out the x-axis here. Passive, active, constructive, and interactive. So if you take those initials and spell it backwards, it spells ICAP. So what we're talking about today is we're talking about education that's interactive. It's more than just constructive. It's really back and forth between the teachers and between the teachers and the students. Passive, in its classic sense, is, of course, I'm giving you a lecture like I am right now, and later, with no discussion or kind of teamwork at all, you're going to take a test. So that's passive education, kind of the classic model. And so they categorized each one of these 2,000 studies according to which kind of education it was. And then, look right now just at the dark bars. The dark bars are the pre-test. And you see that they are about 50%. See those dark bars? Everyone is about 50%. Do you realize what that means? On average, every student at every age in every class knows 50% of the material before they start. So I think that's quite interesting. That was kind of news to me. And then look at the passive education. The white bar is the post-test. That's after the person took the entire course. The error bars overlap. What that means is that within error, they learned nothing, 0. And you can see how the amount that they learned in the post-test goes up and up and up, and with the interactive, it's the highest, with on average about a 30-point improvement on what they learned. So to me, this data set alone should change all the education in the world. It's so clear that interactive education is the best and most effective. And so because this graph really has changed my life and I see it in my dreams, I just wanted to share it with you and so you'll see it too. Yeah, okay. So once again, just to remind the culture we're going for, every person is respected and speaks in every meeting. Everything is an experiment, including the Open Citizen Gathering this weekend and everything that we do. So we really encourage you to think both in the content that you're experiencing in the moment and the metacognitive step of, could this be done in a better way or a different way? So, and we really encourage you to speak up and share. And then this is the team's opportunity to do what matters to them. So that's always a constant reminder for us as facilitators to give the control to the students, give the decisions to the students. All right, role of the facilitators, otherwise known as teachers. To support and advise the team members in their process. We all know that almost every classroom needs a guiding hand to just help things be scheduled and know what's going to happen, but not necessarily to make all the decisions. So that's the really key thing, to advise and support, to ensure that everyone has an input. So because we are a group of human beings, I can predict immediately that there are some people here who more naturally speak up at every opportunity, and some people here who more naturally stay silent. And I don't want to create a culture where we literally require every person to speak. You know, you might be feeling shy. Maybe it's really hard, you're not ready to say something. I'm not going to go, you have to speak in front of everyone. There's lots of tricks that we all know and are going to share to help people prepare to speak. But here are just some rules for us in this room that I want to suggest. One of them comes from Quaker Meeting Business Practice. It's one of my favorite rules in Quaker Meeting, which is in business practice, no one speaks a second time until everyone has spoken once. The reason that is a rule in business practice is because in Quaker Meeting, we don't just have a majority rule. We reach a consensus where everyone agrees that our next step is right. And if we have not reached consensus, we don't take that step. Now, I'm not expecting us to go to that extreme. I'm not even sure it's really practical, and it's not always fun. And we'd like this to be fun. But I want, if you're a natural speaker like I am, just remind yourself, think for a second, wait a minute, I just shared, maybe I could not share right now. Maybe I could turn to the quiet person sitting on my right and say, seemed like you had something, can I encourage you to share it? So just think about that and think about trying to help every voice be heard. So that's something I wanted to add. And then say, I don't know. How many of you said, in response to a student question, in the public setting of the classroom, I don't know the answer to that? How many found that scary to do? Yeah. It's very vulnerable, but it's a great model. So you can say, I really don't know the answer to that, let's find out together. And that's a really great way to be a team member and to remove the fear of the world from people. Students come into school thinking they can't learn unless a teacher teaches them. We know that's not true. So if you take away the fear of not knowing and just point that there's always a way to then find out, that's a really powerful skill you're giving your students. All right, so here's Open Citizen. We have 5 elements. This is what Sarah's drawing in the blue circle, our 5 elements, so that those of you who haven't already been thinking about Open Citizen can kind of help to remember what they are as we go through. The first element is problem selection and ownership. That's where the team decides what the big goal question is altogether. The second one is research. So how many times when you had a big question in your mind, did you then immediately start going, well, I know how to solve that. I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, or the right answer is that. And the truth is, we're usually wrong until we do a bunch of research and find out what the truth is. You know, just as a tiny object lesson, so my main day job these days is a NASA mission. We have a big NASA mission, robotic spacecraft, and it costs a lot of money. And people ask me, how can you justify taking money from NASA to go to space when there are people hungry on the streets? And to me, that is an example of a person who goes from element 1, problem selection, right to project operations. Like, they imagine that if they had that money in their hand, no one would be hungry again. But the truth is that if you start doing your research, and we do research through inquiry cycles, question cycles, you very quickly understand that there are lots of people and tons of money already working on this problem, and that it's really, really hard to solve. And that pouring more money on it is not necessarily an instant solution. And so just keeping that in mind, I want to encourage you when you do this kind of thing in the classroom, don't jump to the answer. Do the research. That's why we state everything as a question, to remind us we don't know the answer yet. So then there's project planning. Then you're going to decide, your students are going to decide, you as a team, what is the action we're going to take as a result of this? Maybe it's to learn a new thing, take a little course together. Maybe it's to do an awareness day. Maybe it's to write a letter. You're going to do a thing, and you're going to show students how to plan that thing and then execute that thing. And then finally, there's learnings and reflections to share back for future teams. One very important thing to say right now is, what is success in this process? Is it that you actually completed the whole thing and you wrote the letter and you got an answer, A+? Does not even matter. Success is learning from the process. That's what success is. It's not a perfect outcome according to your own internal metric. It's just doing your best and learning from the process, experiencing. So in most schools, and I think this is not us here, but maybe some of us teach in these schools, only a little part of the research step is ever taught. Because a lot of times we give the students everything they need to read or learn. We don't let them find it themselves. We don't teach them how to find it themselves. We don't let them struggle through this happens to me when I teach undergraduate classes at ASU. I let the students find their own source and then struggle through it to find the partial answer to their question. Because you almost never find a source that perfectly answers your question. But they have come from schools where they were always given perfectly curated textbook information where every sentence was their responsibility, and they freak out when, what's that?
I said there are schools that still get textbooks.
There are schools that still get textbooks because I have students who've experienced it, right? So, I mean, I know I'm talking with people here who do other things, but I think it's important to point out the contrast and what the result is and why we think it's important for students to learn to research on their own. So, finding sources and learning from them is something that is not even always taught in every school. But to be effective in work and life, you have to learn the whole project process. Because whether you've thought about it in this scaffolding or not, this is a series of activities that we have all done in our lives and in our workplaces, and basically nobody ever teaches you how to do it. Maybe it's just, I need to buy a new kitchen floor. You still have to go through this process. Or maybe it's, there's no childcare in my community and I really want to take a step to solve that. Wouldn't it be amazing if all of our students left school ready to do that? Imagine what a different world it would be. All right, this is another way to show the roadmap. See those 5 same elements that you're going to see over and over again? I'm sorry, this is a little bit fuzzy, but it appears in your workbook. Every one of these slanted things is a deliverable. So this is a fully scaffolded process. And through the day, you might be wanting to look at your workbook. This is a new product that we just made for us today. And you all are the first ones to ever get it, so I'm sure there's lots of errors. So you need to point them out to us. But the way the workbook works is you can open it up, and on a given page, on the left-hand side, you see the instructions, and on the right-hand side, you see a worksheet. So there are instructions and a worksheet for every single deliverable to take you through the entire process. So we think that makes it much more accessible. Of course, Do I need to say this out loud? Of course, you're going to change it for your own needs, and you're going to change it for your own students. But this is one way that the whole process works. And I'm just going to skip to the chase and say, we can't do this for middle school, but for high school students and above who complete all the deliverables and send them into ASU, if they pay $425, they get 3 college credits. And so that's a nice thing for the high school students who can afford it, to be able to do that. We also have badging and certification. So, what is Open Citizen? A network of experts of which you are now officially a part. Congratulations. It is a process for learning and doing, and you get college credit for the skills mastered. All right, what is the process? Okay, right, so I'm just going to walk through in outline a little bit of this in preparation for the rest so that you're kind of set to go. And you can look at what Sarah is drawing here. So in problem selection and ownership, this is where you're going to set your goal question. So we're going to launch the program and we're going to create a goal question. You need a goal question to guide your research and inquiry for the whole program. This is the thing that you want to learn about, the thing you want to take action on, whatever is your goal. So 2 ways to think about goal questions. One might be, what are the top problems or issues that you observe around you and your community? We originally thought of Open Citizen as a very social action-oriented program, and it's great for that. You can also just say, what's something you always wanted to learn? And you need to learn how to learn something. You know, what is the thing I'm trying to learn? And then like go online and find a course. That's a possible thing to do. And I will say that we've run parts of this process everywhere from 6th grade up through graduate school. And the 6th graders who were at Roosevelt School in Mesa, they were allowed to think about what their big goal question was as 6th graders, and they said, 6th grade, right? Yeah, 6th grade, yeah. And their big goal question was something like, and maybe you guys will know exactly what it was, but it was something like, how do I make my school happier? Is basically what their question was. This was during COVID, or just after the first year of COVID. So their big, isn't that the most touching thing? How do we make our school a happier place? So they did all this research, and they decided on an action, and a part of their action was, we're going to smile at people in the hallway, and another part was, we're going to open the door for people when they're going through the door. So the point of this anecdote is not just to make you cry because it was so adorable, but also because the students themselves know what their territory is. They know how big their reach is, and they understand their world. They're experiencing it all the time. You know this as teachers, that they have opinions and thoughts that are real for themselves in their community. So those teachers also connected what they were doing to math by having them keep track of how many people said thank you when they opened the door for them. And to have little social emotional conversations around, one 6th grader gave a big smile to a 1st grader who was coming the other way from the cafeteria in their lines, and the 1st grader like made a horrible face back at her, and she was so upset. So they had a classroom conversation about it. What if it had nothing to do with you and your smile, and this poor kid was just having a terrible day? And suddenly they had empathy for this little boy who otherwise would have made them angry and really disaffected, and they realized like maybe he forgot his lunch money or he couldn't find his shoe, like they were making stuff up. So anyway, this is a good example of like how the goal question that your students choose is going to be appropriate for them. So not to be afraid of that. We like to set team norms. How many of you set norms in the classroom? How many of you have never set norms in your life and do not know what I'm talking about? Everybody does. Okay. And don't be shy not to know something, because that's like one of our tenets, right? So if really you've never set norms, you shouldn't feel embarrassed about it. So if you've already set norms in your classroom, you might be set to do this, but I would just encourage you to think about it, and if you haven't set norms, to do it. And I'm having a very interesting time with our team at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where they do not set norms, and where setting norms is like weird, and people are afraid of it and very unhappy, but frankly, they really need to. And so figuring out how to ease into it is something I'd love to get your advice on when you've had people who don't want to set norms come and tell me during breaks. So some example norms: everyone speaks and is listened to in every meeting. Believe that everyone comes with best intentions. That's such a gigantic one, and it's so hard. And then encourage people to ask for help. I want to tell you a tiny story about believing that everyone comes with best intentions. I'm going to make it as short as I can, and my family's tired of this story because I've been like raving over it. It just happened to me. There was a guy in academia who I had a very bad opinion of over several years. He seemed very condescending and very hero model, and he would answer questions after his lectures in a really snotty way and make people feel stupid. And I'm sure you can have like a mental picture of this person. We've met people like this. And I was really turned off of him, and I really thought I never want to work with this person. I'd like mentally crossed him off my list. Then I was at a conference where they did table prompts like we did last night. And we're going to do them again at dinner tonight, if you were not here last night. A question that everyone at the table answers for each other. So that there's one conversation at the table, you learn about each other. And the prompt we had was, what makes you cry? When do you cry? Great question, by the way. I encourage you to do it with people you're not afraid of. So this guy said, he was at my table, and he said, I almost never cry. But I had this experience the other day. He teaches at a university in England. I had a student in my class, in my office, during office hours for a half hour, very, very upset. Tried to help her, off she went. A little while later, the department chair came in and said, do you understand how upset she was? She sat in your office and cried for a half hour. And he said, I didn't think she was that upset. I just thought she'd been out in the rain. Because his neurodiversity made it so he literally can't tell when someone's crying. So he really cares about other people's emotions, it turns out, and he has his own emotions, absolutely 100%. He just can't read people. He said, the thing I learned that day is when people have water on their face, ask them, are you crying? So to me, that was a whole new level of believing that people come with best intentions and how wrong I'd been. So it's one of these things we can keep working on. All right, example goal questions. How can we make our school a happier place? How can I learn to build a robot? What can increase access to healthy food? So any kind of question, as big as you can imagine, the bigger the better. Not phrased perfectly, no problem. Go with what you end up with. It's the right question, whatever it is for you that day. So that's what happens during element 1. You do a goal question table where you're brainstorming goal questions, lots of ways to make that simpler for your students because brainstorming in person is often problematic, totally get that. You do your team norms, you reach consensus, and you select your goal question, and then you do a progress check-in. This progress check-in is simply answering the questions on the growth mindset list. So we do growth mindset at the end of element 1 and at the end of element 5, and we really hope to get a database to see whether this helps with growth mindset. So that's the number 1, problem selection and ownership. Research. Imagine in real life, as we all are, all the time, even when we're in the classroom, in real life. You want to learn something, you've got this goal, something you want to learn about. One of our practice ones for this is, how do I make a better cup of coffee? So you want to know that. Well, all of us probably would just Google something, right? You Google it and you find something, a piece of content. So you're going to look at that piece of content and it's going to raise another question because it's not going to answer everything, right? We've done this a billion times, haven't we all? Then it's called going down a rabbit hole, but maybe there's a more structured way to do it. So from that piece of content, you have a question. We call it a natural next question. We call it natural because it is your natural question. It's really what comes up next in your head. And it's a next question because it takes you one small step toward your big goal. A digestible size, one little research step, a natural next question. Then you find, say, 2 pieces of content. You follow one of them with another natural next question, then you're like, well, I think I'll go back to the other one. Ask another natural next question, get a couple of answers, you follow one, you follow another one. And what you're doing is you're filling out a landscape with a mind map of information that you're discovering, probably crossing many disciplines, and getting you a kind of a broad knowledge of what your final answer is until you've done enough that you do kind of understand what your answer to how to build a better cup of coffee is. And maybe along the way you've learned things like, how do you know when you know everything? Never, right? And that sometimes is very scary for students. I get asked that a lot in the classes when we teach inquiry. How will I know when I'm done? And the answer is you are never done. And then they're scared, and you have to just say more, because that wasn't helpful. Yeah. So instead of doing it as a mind map, we can do it as this picture, which you're going to see a lot of. Top left, you define your goal. Then you go into this thing that we call the question cycle. So you form your natural next question, you find some information, and then you summarize and you bring it back to the team. So just imagine for a second this is in the classroom. You all agreed on the same natural next question. You don't have to, and you can do this alone. Students can do this as individual projects. They can go through the whole thing by themselves. We've had amazing results. Or you can do it in subgroups. But whatever group of you have decided on the same natural next question, you all went home and found some piece of content, you brought back a summary. If you are 10, the summary might be a sentence. You know, if you're in college, it's a formatted one-page specified response. You're back in the classroom. Now, you each take turns explaining what you learned. So every person speaks, and every person is respected because you all found different information to help solve the same question you're all interested in. So everyone comes in pre-armed with information that everyone else is interested in automatically and that they don't already know. So that's the question cycle. You want to do it a few times, and then do what we call a distillation, which we're going to talk about more, but it's a way to bring all of the information together in a graphical form, because we know through cognitive science that if you make a graphical form of your information, you remember it much better. So these all are carefully crafted practices over many years to help with learning and retention. So that is element 2. We ask people to do 3 question cycles and a distillation, and then a little progress check-in. So element 3 is project planning. So now you've learned a lot. 3 question cycles is probably not enough to learn everything you need to know, but you can decide. Maybe there isn't time for more, you're going to go with what you've got. Maybe you do want to do more research and not go on to element 3 right now. Totally up to you. But to get, for example, the credit or to be considered finished, you should do 3. So project planning, we actually step you through with your students doing a task list. So here's an example of tasks for Community Hunger Awareness Day. Work with town leadership to schedule the day. Maybe it's work with your principal to get a table at lunch hour. Like whatever is the right scale. Plan activities and materials for the table and make a staffing schedule. It's probably not all the tasks, but it's a great practice to brainstorm with your kids, with the whole team. What are the steps we need to do to actually complete this thing, and then who's going to do them, and how long will they take? Will this be actually what happens? What do you think the chances are? No way. Did it ever work for you personally when you made this for yourself and your own projects? Never, right? I will tell you that in aerospace, we make these things in crazy detail, in giant scheduling pieces of software, and then we put in 30% margin, because honestly, we just suck at scheduling and writing down tasks. But you gotta try, because then you kind of know what you're doing, and you can measure back against what you did. So if you were feeling nervous, like I could never do this, there's always a way to do it at your scale, at the level that your team is at, and then all you do is you make a try and compare back, right? It's not a fail situation, it's just a try situation. So element 3, you figure out what you're going to do and you create a work plan, and we've got scaffolding for figuring that out. Then you do it. I can't really walk you through that because I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, you do it, and then there's some learning and reflection. So those are our 5 steps. Choose your topic, do your research, choose your action, do your action, reflect on how it went. It's just learning how to do things and learning how to learn. And I believe that is the end of my intro to Open Citizen.